Reading with your kids.
Hola, niho, konnichiwa, assalamu alaikum, shalom, mahaba, moni miliwanji, namaste, jambo, bienvenidos. Hi, my name is Jedley, and this is the Reading with Your Kids podcast. We are coming to you from the beautiful neighborhood of Reedville in the southwest corner of Boston, Massachusetts. We're so delighted and so very honored that you're joining us in our missions to help families grow closer through reading and to give parents the tools they need to help their kids learn to respect, love, and include absolutely everyone. Please be sure to subscribe to the show on the iHeartRadio app, on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, Audible, Stitcher Radio, wherever you find your podcasts. Our guest today is Rachel Tomlinson. She is here to celebrate a blue kind of day. Before we invite Rachel to join us in the studio, we want to invite you to connect with us on social media. We love connecting with folks on social media. Facebook.com/readingwithyourkids, at Reading With Your Kids on Instagram. If you're a Twitter user, it's at Jedley Magic. Be sure to check out our Pinterest page, Reading With Your Kids. And in April, we're going to be launching a brand new free e-newsletter from our website, readingwithyourkids.com. So please do visit readingwithyourkids.com. Sign up for that free newsletter. Can't wait to share all the neat things that we're going to be doing with that newsletter. It's going to be an awful lot of fun. Oh, also on readingwithyourkids.com, there is a contact button at the top of the page. You can use that to let us know what we're doing great, let us know what we could be doing better, and let us know who you would like to hear on an episode of the show. Join us right now from Perth in the nation of Australia, where it's like midnight. Our guest today is here to celebrate her new book. It's called A Blue Kind of Day. Please welcome to the show, Rachel Tomlinson. Hey, Rachel, how are you?
Oh, thank you so much for having me. Apart from it being nearly midnight, I think I'm doing okay.
Well, we really appreciate you being up and joining us right now. Tell us all about A Blue Kind of Day, please.
It's my debut picture book, and I'm so excited to have it out there in the world. I first started writing when I was working in play therapy, and this book has been in the works for me for a really, really long time. And so to actually see it out is really exciting. It's a really gentle story about a young boy with depression. And one of the risks that as loved ones we run is that we want to rush our kids through or our other loved ones through really tough feelings, and sometimes coping and feeling better and managing actually comes with space and time. And it's a very gentle story about how family can hold that space for a loved one who's not feeling their best.
Yeah. Now, you are a therapist.
Mm-hmm. Yes. I'm a registered psychologist, yeah.
How prevalent is depression in kids?
It's quite tricky because depression doesn't present the same way that it might in adults. So as adults, we can describe the feelings and we've learned the words to accompany that internal experience. But for children, they're more likely to describe the symptoms or how it feels in their body. And that's actually a lot of what I cover in the book. It's so that parents and children can learn to identify that a little bit better. So they might describe, feeling really flat, or like their body feels heavy, or they might feel like they're coiled like a spring. They're more likely to give you those kind of descriptors. So the figures around childhood depression is probably a little on the low side because there would be many children out there. But I think the lifetime prevalence rates in Australia, I'm not sure about internationally, is up to 1 in 4 people will experience depression in their lifetime.
Wow. That's a really significant number.
Yes.
Yeah. And again, of that number, I'm guessing that a lot of people don't get the proper treatment and support that they need.
Yeah, and that's why I actually started working with children. I have worked with adults and I still work with adults, but you see those missed opportunities for connection, for someone to have intervened, to have provided that support as a young child, or to a family, you know, how they can support their young child. And it always makes you wonder, you know, how many of those children would then have not gone on. We know that there are many more things, you know, that, you know, underpin depression. So it can be lifelong, but you still wonder, you know, if we've had this good intervention, could they have had a different outcome if we'd have just started and supported earlier?
Yeah. Now, I don't know if people really, I don't even know if I really understand what depression is. I remember there was a moment in my life when I was in human services and working with kids, and we had 2 or 3 kids pass away just in a really short period of time. And I was feeling like I had never felt before, and I went to see someone, and again, this was 30, 35 years ago, and the person I went to see said, of course you're sad. Your friend's died. Get over it. Be gone. And I did. So I don't know if I was just sad. And I'm guessing that I wasn't depressed in the way that we're talking about here. Can you kind of help us understand what the difference is between just being sad or being blue and truly experiencing depression?
There's a lovely internationally based diagnostic manual that that helps us to really look at those symptoms. But I think the biggest kind of takeaway is that everybody, you're right, everybody at some point will experience sadness or symptoms of depression. It doesn't necessarily make it depression. And yes, those massive life events, you know, trauma and, you know, grief and loss will present in really similar ways. But depression is a number of different things, and you have to have experienced these symptoms for over a period and for the majority of the days during that period. So it's a period of over 2 weeks, and it's for the majority of those days. So it's not just like fleeting experiences, but it's like a whole body sensory flattening. So it's called psychomotor agitation, you know, so it's actually, you know, a depressing of the psychomotor, you know, skills. So your body actually feels heavier, you feel tired, you feel flat, it's hard to be motivated. It can also be coupled with negative automatic thoughts, and suicidal thoughts as well come into that. Suicidal attempts can come into that. You also have physical changes, so appetite changes. So it could be increased appetite or decreased appetite, changes to sleep. So too much sleep or not enough sleep. So things like trouble staying asleep or even falling asleep. And those are just some of them. But what makes what makes the diagnosis is that it's impacting someone's capacity to function in their daily life. So it's not just, gee, I'm feeling sad. It's actually stopping them from functioning how they previously would. And then you also have that sort of change in, you know, loss of enjoyment in things that you would previously have enjoyed. It's really difficult to actually sort of find that motivation to even do things that would make you feel happy. So it can become quite cyclical.
Mm-hmm. So I guess if we're seeing somebody in our lives, our kids, our spouse, probably the worst thing to say to them is, hey, come on, suck it up. You're going to get over it.
Yes. It's so well-meaning though. It's so well-meaning because, and that's something that I do cover in the book is, you know, you want to shivvy your loved ones along and you want to jostle them out of those feelings because you've got that agenda that you don't want to see them, and not a bad agenda, but that agenda that you don't want them to feel pain or stress. You want to move them out of that, and we encourage by, but come on, it can't be that bad, or like, you know, things can't be so awful, or just, you know, snap out of it. No one's ever gotten better by saying snap out of it or just feel happy. I promise you, it's never happened. But it is really important to start that dialogue with family and friends. And if you notice that someone is not their normal self, asking the question, are you okay? How are you? And even saying what you can see, you don't seem your usual self, you seem really sad, can just be a great opener to a conversation about mental health and well-being.
Yeah. I think what that statement that you just shared with us, hey, you don't look like yourself. You look like you're sad. Mm-hmm. That, I think, is probably a much more effective way to begin a conversation than how you feeling? How was your day? Because I know even with a typical kid who's not experiencing depression, when you start off with how was your day? How was school? It's like, it's good. You don't get a lot of information unless you kind of drill down and ask some specific questions.
Yeah. My daughter's the same. I'm a psychologist, but I still forget every day because I want to know how her day was, and I ask her, and she's like, oh, it was fine. Her dad gets so much more out of her than I ever would because he just plays it cool and lets it come out. But what you were referring to there is, validation and normalizing, and when you can name somebody else's feeling, or you make that attempt to connect with them on an emotional level like that, you are demonstrating your connection and your interest and your care in them. And that goes a huge way towards trust. They're more likely to tell you something. They're also going to feel pretty positive because our brains are wired to seek connection. And so we feel positive when we do have a connection. So it is a great way to start that conversation.
Yeah. One of the topics that's come up a lot on the show when we're talking about homelessness or other kind of issues is that when we see somebody and when we let the person know that we see them and by our words, by our actions, that makes a huge difference. So I'm imagining that's what you're talking about. When we see, when our kids who are suffering know that we see them and see what they're going through, even if we don't understand it, but we know that we know that we need to help them and support them. That must make a tremendous difference in the kids' life at that moment.
Yeah, it's unbelievable. People often ask, what is the secret of therapy? Which is the best mode of therapy to use? And by and large, the research out there says it's actually the connection with the therapist and the client is the vehicle for change. And yeah, our brains are built for connection, and the power of being seen and truly heard is massive and not to be minimized at all. It's very powerful.
Yeah. Rachel, was there a moment, one specific thing that inspired you to write A Blue Kind of Day?
Oh, yes. I was in a session with a client and we were talking about, Mum was talking about, are there any good books that I can, read? Because how there are some books that are aimed for children about, how do we talk about this topic? But there's a few really good ones on grief and loss. That tends to be a fairly, common one. Back when I wrote it anyway, there's now a lot more out on the market, that are sort of therapeutically based. And I could not think of a picture book about depression. And it really affected me because I'm a reader. I love reading. I'm an absolute bookworm. And I felt such kind of empathy and compassion for this young person who wouldn't be able to see themselves and their situation represented in literature. Because that's the power of story, right? It's so transformative. You see these characters and you immerse yourself in these worlds. And my kids, not my kids, the kids that I worked with, my kids, didn't have that same opportunity to see themselves. And I ended up writing, it wasn't a blue kind of day, but it was a story for this particular child that talked through some of the experiences that they experienced. And then it talked through some of the coping that they had been learning in counselling and that their family had been working on with them and that they had been developing. And I sort of printed it out. It was so like, yeah, it was just like printed out and like stapled together, and it was a hot mess, but there was like areas where he was able to like go in and draw some pictures to go with it. But it was so impactful. He took it home with him at the end of therapy, and I sort of like had sort of shared the idea with some colleagues, and someone had said, you should write a book. You should write a book for those kids. And I was like, I'm going to write a book. I'm going to write a book for the kids who cannot see themselves in literature. And that's why this book is so important to me. I'm so excited about it.
Well, I think it should excite you, because we've talked a lot here on the podcast about the power of representation and how important it is for kids to be able to see themselves represented positively in the pages of books. And I think it's equally important for others to see their neighbors, their classmates, positively portrayed in the pages of books. I think that this is the area of mental health and depression. I think probably when I was growing up, there were people out there who might think, oh, kids can't be depressed. That doesn't happen to little kids, you know? And we certainly know that that's not true. And it's still, we're talking about it more now, but mental health issues with kids is still one of those areas that people just don't feel comfortable talking about and would rather avoid. And so I think that this is a really important book for kids who are suffering, and also for their classmates, because understanding is a great first step towards friendship.
Yeah. And empathy, you know, we can all learn to be more empathic. And I think that the power of reading is that you can suck in so many stories and so many different perspectives and learn about things that is not your lived experience, but it can help you, and it will never be your lived experience, but having that like small facet into somebody else's story can really help you to learn to be an empathic person, because you understand that yours is not the only perspective. And all children will go through some period, like you said, you know, your own experiences, and everybody out there is, you know, I'm just going to name it and say it, everybody out there has felt sad at some point. And I think it's really important to learn how to name and own and accept those difficult feelings, because we seem to have this funny relationship with our emotions. We really like being happy. That's great. But we're less tolerant of other emotions, you know, negative emotions, even though emotions are just a response to things that are happening around us, and they give us important messages about what's happening and what we need. But we sort of shut that stuff down, and when we shut down those messages, we don't get our needs met, and that can further, you know, have other issues down the track. So all kids learning about feelings and accepting feelings and talking about feelings, all the feelings, that's what I'm about.
So very important. I'm wondering, there may be, I'm imagining my grandmother, if she was still with us, she might think, oh, I don't want my kids to read this book, because then they might think that they're depressed and they might catch it or something. That's not possible, right?
No, not at all. You're actually, and that's a similar thing with like suicide. If I ask about suicide, maybe it's catching, maybe it will put the thought in their heads. And that isn't true. If somebody's already feeling that way, they're actually going to feel an immense sense of relief. And you can't make somebody else feel a particular way. So by talking about it, you can't sort of insert that thought, you know, into their mind. But what it is doing is it's teaching them that this is an acceptable conversation for us to have, that it's okay that we talk about these different types of feelings, and that feelings are all right, and feeling low, flat, depressed. But I also don't mention the word depression in the book, because children don't use the word depression. It's all about how a child has, like I've used clinical sort of experience, like this is how children have described how it feels in their body, and children will connect to that in some way.
Yeah. So important. Speaking of discussions, just off the top, a typical kid, not in that 25% of people who will experience depression, but just a typical kid sitting down, reading this book with their parents, what kind of conversations do you think they'll be able to have around the book?
I think some general discussions around how is that child feeling. So the way that we use books in my house is I'll sort of ask my daughter to try and empathize or tell me something about the main character. Well, why do you think he's feeling that way? Or well, what are the family trying to do? Or asking lots of different questions. And this story is a story about family. So they can have that. Their takeaway message can be about the power of connection. Their takeaway message could be about it's okay to talk about emotions. There's also the idea of patience and, waiting. There's also that idea of, being seen that we discussed as well. There's so many sort of, I wouldn't say subliminal, but sort of like hidden stories that children could take away from that depending on what they need and where they're at. Because no, not every child is depressed or is experiencing sadness at that moment, but it's a really great starting conversation and great for them to have read the story so that in the future, if they do have those feelings, they might be able to better put words to it.
I think one of the issues I mentioned, my grandmother might not want people to read this book for fear of catching it. I think one of the fears that my grandmother and maybe my mom had was I don't want to know. I don't want to mention the word because if I don't mention the word, then we don't have to deal with it, and it's really scary. And I guess they're worried that there's no way to cure somebody who is experiencing depression. What say you? Are there effective treatments for folks who are experiencing depression, and what kind of therapies do people need to go through?
Sure, absolutely. There is life without depression. I can't get into the medical side. I'm not a medical practitioner, but there is absolutely pharmacotherapy. Oh, it's too late at night. Medication. Medication, Jen, medication. Absolutely, and that's something that you would discuss with a medical professional, not with a therapist, or in Australia we call us registered psychologists. There's different names all around the world, but yeah, that's what we are here. But there's a gold star treatment that has been evidenced and researched to the hilt called cognitive behavior therapy. There are a number of other very, very good quality interventions and modes of therapy, but that's the one that it's called like the gold standard. It's incredibly effective in terms of many mental health conditions, including depression and anxiety. And it tackles, so cognitive is thoughts, behavior is behavior, and it looks at the links between thoughts, feelings, and behavior and how they all influence one another. And you can't necessarily change a feeling. So if I was to say to you, just be happy right now, this very second, doesn't really work. But if we change our behavior and do things with intention to make us feel happy, or we find the thought patterns that are, making us feel particular ways. So if you're having worried, anxious, sad, worst case scenario kinds of thoughts, like how can we address those thinking patterns so that it's going to influence your mood in a more positive way?
Yeah. Well,
that one's the gold standard. There are many others though, of course.
Rachel, are there any resources available to parents that they can use to know what they should be looking for?
I actually included an author's note at the back of the book because I figured that once parents had started delving into the topic that they would want to know more. So we have discussed what some of the symptoms might look like. I've also included in the back of the book what parents can be on the lookout for and when is a good time to reach out for professional help and support. But I've also included a couple of strategies that I used in play therapy and that I use ongoing with kids that can help parents to support their child's emotional literacy and emotional intelligence. So that's learning all about different ways of describing and talking about their feelings to just sort of help get that conversation started.
Awesome. And that's at the back of the book.
Yes.
Well, this has been a fascinating conversation. And if it wasn't 12:30 in the morning in Perth, I'd say we should talk some more. But I think it's really important for folks to be able to know where they can go to find out more about A Blue Kind of Day and also find out more about you.
I have a website, so towardwellbeing.com, and I'm also on Instagram. So my handle is @towardwellbeing, all lowercase. And on that Instagram page, I share lots of different parenting tips and information and resources. I really feel that the more information that we can give to parents, the more choices that they can make in terms of, looking after their young people and having, good quality relationships with their young people. So I'm all about, giving lots of, resources and information out there. And my book is available at all good bookstores. So all the usual ones. I think it's definitely on Amazon, Walmart, Barnes and Noble, Target, WH Smith. It's international, so there's lots of different places that you can find my book.
And we love supporting our independent bookshop, so you can give your local bookshop a call and say, hey, do you have A Blue Kind of Day by Rachel Tomlinson? If they say no, you can just ask really nice, can you order it for me, please? It'll be there in a couple of days.
Please do. I'm aware that some independent booksellers have picked it up. I'm not as familiar with the names, just coming from Australia, but I do know that a couple of quite niche and independent bookstores have picked it up, which is super exciting.
Yeah. Well, we're really excited. We had an opportunity to speak with the author of A Blue Kind of Day, Rachel Tomlinson. Rachel, thank you so very much for being with us today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Please be sure to join us for the next episode of the Reading with Your Kids podcast. Our guest will be Sasha Graham. She'll be here to celebrate Tiny Ninja Books. This is a really fascinating conversation with an author who is a former vice president in Disney. A lot to share with us. You don't want to miss it. I want to thank the folks who made today's show so wonderful. Of course, we want to start by thanking our guest, Rachel Tomlinson. A lot of really important information we spoke about today. Please be sure to check out A Blue Kind of Day. Also want to thank my team, Fatima Khan, Skylar Strauss, Rory Grady. I want to thank my beautiful wife for all the support she gave me. Most of all, we all want to thank you. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. And as always, thank you so very much for taking the time to make the world a better place by reading with your kids. I'll be looking for you in the next edition of the Reading with Your Kids podcast.